Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Heart Talk on mental health and heart disease, honest conversations and shared experiences. I'm Selena Gore. Hello, I'm the CEO here at Women Heart, and I want to thank you all for joining this really important Heart Talk. Today's conversation will focus on the emotional and the mental health impact of living with heart disease. It's a part of the journey that many women experience, but few of us really know how to discuss it openly. Today's session is being recorded, and we're going to leave time near the end for our audience Q&A. So please feel free to submit your questions throughout the discussion using our Q&A feature. As always, today's conversation is intended for educational and supportive purposes only and should not replace medical or mental health advice from your own healthcare team. For anyone new to Women Heart, we are the nation's patient-centered organization dedicated to supporting women living with or at risk for heart disease. And we do that through education, advocacy, community awareness, as well as peer support. We are so grateful to everyone joining us today, especially to our moderator and panelists for their openness and willingness to share their experiences. I'm now going to turn things over to Kiki Feeling, Women Heart Champion from the class of 2025. She's not only a champion, she's a licensed psychologist, and she is going to begin today's discussion. Over to you, Kiki.
Thank you, Selena, and thank you everyone for being here today. I am so excited for this conversation because as many women living with heart disease know, the impact of diagnosis and recovery extends far beyond physical symptoms. Experiences like fear, grief, anxiety, guilt, shame, loneliness, uncertainty, changes in identity, all sorts of emotional and mental health difficulties are incredibly common, but they're often not discussed openly. And so today's conversation is intended to change that and to create space for honesty, reflection, and shared learning. We'll hear from women living with heart disease about the emotional realities they've navigated, what coping and adjustment looked like for them, and then what helped them move through the most difficult moments. I want to acknowledge explicitly upfront that there is no correct emotional response to heart disease and no perfect way to cope. Everyone's experiences is different. And so this conversation is meant to be an opportunity to hear the experiences of some others, to reflect, and then hopefully feel a little less alone in these experiences that can feel so isolating sometimes. So let's start with some quick introductions from the panelists. Could you each briefly share your name, where you're joining from, and a little bit about your heart disease journey?
I'll go first. My name is Elsa Garcia Chow, and I am beaming in from California. I'm a Women Heart Champion, class of 2023. I was diagnosed in 2017 with non-ischemic cardiomyopathy with a low ejection fraction. That led to an ICD being implanted a few months after my diagnosis. And then I lived with that for 5 years, congestive heart failure, shocks, until my heart began to really just fail, and I needed a heart transplant. To the day, five years later, I received my heart on February 28th, 2023, from my donor, Lide Evelyn Ladepo. And because she said yes to organ donation, I am here today. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deborah Raffson. I am a member of the virtual class of 2026, so I am a brand new Women Heart Champion, and I'm really happy to be included in this panel. I currently live in Boynton Beach, Florida, and I was diagnosed with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy in 2011. On day one, I was told that the best treatment plan for me was probably going to be open heart surgery, a septal myectomy. And instead of accepting that and moving towards it, I resisted that. It took 5.5 years and a decreased quality of life and going into heart failure for me to finally agree to do the open heart surgery. And as a result of the surgery, I have an ICD and I am 100% pacemaker dependent. In 2024, I had a double lead extraction and my very first ICD replacement.
Hi, I am Danielle Poole from North Carolina. I'm a Women Heart Champion class of 2023. I had a heart attack with sudden onset symptoms when I was 44 years old in 2022. So I was thrust into the cardiovascular world without any anticipation that I was about to go into this area of life. So I didn't have any previous symptoms that I was aware of. And I did not know at the time that I was actually predisposed to having cardiovascular disease. So that is my story.
Hi, everyone. I'm Claire DeAndre. I'm the senior here on this panel, and I'm from the class of 2004 Women Heart Training. I started with high blood pressure at the age of 42, and at the age of 44, we had a very stressful move across country. And at the age of 45, I ended up with a stent in my heart for 98% blocked occluded left anterior descending artery. I'm one of the lucky ones. I didn't have a heart attack. And then in 2012, I had a right carotid endarterectomy for a fully blocked carotid artery. Didn't have a stroke either. So I'm very, very lucky and blessed. And I'm very happy to be here to share my journey with others.
Thank you all. And I am Kiki Failing, the moderator for today, hailing in from Western Massachusetts. Like Danielle, mine came on really suddenly and unexpectedly. I suffered a heart attack when I was 29 years old, caused by a blood clot that went through a hole in my heart that I was born with, but hadn't known that up until that point. So after getting treatment for getting a thrombectomy and then getting the congenital heart defect closed, I have worked on recovering since then and been a Women Heart Champion since just last year, 2025. So I would love to kind of open it up in a broad sense to everyone. And so the first question to open up the conversation is when you think back to the time surrounding your diagnosis or the cardiac event, that initial event, what stands out to you most emotionally? And feel free to pop in.
I'll jump up and
I'll
speak.
say fear.
So for me, we were coming to the end of the COVID pandemic worldwide, and I was hopeful that the world was about to open back up. And then all of a sudden, my world closed down. I was on bed rest, and my emotional state was declining and getting dark very quickly, day by day, moment by moment. I seemed to be more sad, more sullen, more depressed, less hopeful. I, at the onset, when I was in the hospital with my heart attack, I actually was very secure. I felt strong. I thought, it was unexpected, but pretty much I had confidence in my body that I would be okay. And then the more test results and the more treatments and the more prescriptions, it all began to take a mental toll that I didn't have the personal fortitude to push myself forward as I had, just a week previous. I felt like a different person that didn't know how to get myself better, so to speak.
Yeah, I think Claire mentioned it, fear, right? Right away. Um, Mine was disbelief. Like even as I was having my heart event, like the day I went to the ER, I was dressed ready to go to Pilates. And I was like, no, I'm not going to the doctor. It can't be my heart. So, and even after being in the hospital for several days and having all the tests, I still felt like this can't be happening to me, and maybe that's part of the denial part, and then it became like this all of a sudden loss of control. Like I was controlling my life. I was going to work, I was a mother, I was a sister, I was all these roles, the wife. And all of a sudden that world changed, for me with that initial diagnosis. When I was told I had ventricular tachycardia and they couldn't do an ablation, that's when things just seemed that glass just shattered, even more and more cracks appeared, because I thought then there's nothing they can do for me, and we just sat outside the electrophysiologist's office, and I just cried, and I hadn't done that, because it was just the news so devastating, and I just kept thinking, I gotta fix this because, we just women, we just grab the duct tape and go to work with our lives, but I couldn't, and that was the hardest part, to accept that I couldn't control anything. And I just had to do the best I could or what I could control. And I guess it took a while to define that. It was eating better, it was exercising, it was doing all these things to get better, not realizing I was not going to get better, and that was really hard to take too. But to everyone else, oh, she's doing great. She's fine. Wow, she's losing weight, but inside it was just this, your own little battle, right? Between your world that you knew where you're at and trying to think, what is my future going to look like? And trying to just come to term with all those things. And it was rough, and right away it was, where do I go for help? How do I do this? I can't do this alone, you know. I'll pass it on.
Yeah, fear was definitely the predominant emotion for me as well. And I really let it take over my decision-making processes. Like I said in my introduction, I knew I had to have this surgery immediately, right? And I just pushed it off and pushed it off. And it wasn't because I, didn't understand why I needed to have the surgery and how it could potentially improve my life. It was because I I couldn't figure out how to overcome the fear in order to move forward with the recommended treatment option. And I think as a result of that, that led to, feeling isolated because I didn't know anyone else who had hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. There weren't there weren't online support groups at the time. I hadn't yet figured out what all of my resources were to connect with other people with heart disease in general or with my specific condition. And so I didn't have other people with similar experience to talk to. And then I also didn't know how to talk to my family and friends about what I was experiencing because they weren't in my body. They didn't know how my shortness of breath was impacting my daily life. And, it's sort of also like what you were saying, it was hard to believe too. I was 32 when I was diagnosed. I had a great job. I was, had an active job. I enjoyed what I was doing. And I kept thinking, I'm too young for this. And other people kept saying it to me too. You're too young for this. You look healthy. You look great. You must be fine. And trying to overcome all of those barriers was really challenging.
I'll just jump in about the fear and carry on with that because I was 45 and I remember having my stress test done. And I'm a nurse. I was never trained that women had heart disease and that we, particularly at a young age. And so I just felt like I was floundering. And we had just moved across the country. We were only here 6 months. And I used to work in a cath lab, so I knew how all of that worked. And I was in disbelief. And the day I did my stress test, I was on the treadmill and I could see my EKG. I couldn't do more than 3 minutes. And they ran out to grab the doctor. I was on the table with nitro, with oxygen, with aspirin. And I went home and I cried, never told my kids because I was afraid that I was going to die. I didn't know anybody else with at the young age with heart disease, but I was lucky. I didn't have a heart attack. And so I had to look at that as a very positive thing for me. But the other emotion that hit me was because I'm a nurse, I had no support. Where I was working, they were asking me to go talk to other women, but I wasn't helping myself as well. And so, like Elsa said, and everybody else said, finding the things that I had to do to help myself get better and emotionally become more emotionally stable because it's such a fearful moment. Am I going to die? Am I going to be impaired? And people look at us and see us on the outside and think we look young and vibrant and happy and healthy, and they don't know the spinning turmoil going on inside. So it's a true journey for each of us, not physically, but emotionally.
I will say so much of what you all are sharing resonates with me deeply. The fear, the anxiety, the disbelief, the change in what's going on with my life, what's going on with my body, like that inherently is scary when suddenly feeling like you're losing control. And I think you're all touching on the ways in which heart disease and or many cardiac events are medical trauma. So of course we're going to feel anxiety, fear, etc. But also, like you were kind of hinting at, Claire, the symptoms of heart disease mimic or are the same as anxiety and vice versa. And that can get so difficult for people to parse between. I want to jump on what you're saying about coping, but before we move on to that part, I hear a lot of fear and anxiety. I heard the isolation. I'm curious if there were other specific other like emotional or mental health challenges besides these that came up for you after diagnosis? What other kinds of emotional experiences were there that were difficult?
I think facing our mortality, right? Where you just think, um, I'm gonna, not that we're gonna live forever because we know the end game, but this can't be happening to me. Like, I'm fine. I'm okay. I'm still in my body and I'm thinking, and all of a sudden it's no, like there's a clock, and you don't know when it's gonna run out. I was so afraid for a while to leave the house because I thought, like, especially after the ICD, because you hear all these things about when you get a shock, it's like a horse kicks you or something. Yes and no. Mine kind of just came and they were like just warm, buzzy feelings or like ringing in my ears. Other times, yeah, I levitated out of the bed. I just kind of like jumped up and a good, foot and then came back down. So it was just that fear of if it happens to me when I'm in the market, if it happens to me when I'm at the 99-cent store, do I want it to happen to me there? And then I'd be like, no, I don't want it. I don't want that to be on the news or on my, tombstone. So just this whole like looming death just started to take over, where all of a sudden it was, I've got an expiration date, and I don't know when that's going to happen. And yeah, I still feel that now after transplant, but so soon after that diagnosis and then 2 months later getting the ICD and not knowing what it meant because I fought the ICD also. I just kept thinking I'll be fine, and then once I got it, then it was when is it going to fire and what's that going to be like for me, and then when it started firing and it just got comfortable firing, then that just kept weakening me, so it really just it's wild how it can change just so quickly, how you go through this, I guess, that roller coaster of the emotions, where you get to a point where you feel comfortable, like that shoe's not going to drop. I'm okay. And then all of a sudden you have an event, you have to go to the hospital for something, and you just think, okay, I'm back on it again. Now, what do I do? It's this gripping, I will mention that, I did find that support with Women Heart. I was able to find them, and I went from the ICD doctor straight to a Woman Heart meeting at 2 o'clock. I was like, I can make the meeting. And it was the best thing for me because again, I was in a group with other women that had not my ICD issue because everybody had had heart attacks or widowmakers or valve replacements. And so it was still a little isolating being the only, the outlier with the ICD. But and for those that don't know, the ICD is like a pacemaker, but there's wires that go straight into your heart. So if your heart ever acts funky, it kind of resets you. So you are getting that, AED effect internally. So if for those watching that don't know, and it is scary because we just looked at it like it's a little lifeguard on your shoulder that's going to be there to help you. And after transplant, I saved my ICD because I thought this little girl kept me alive. If it wasn't for this, piece of machinery, I wouldn't be here today. So I have fond memories of her, although she still scares me, but it was rough.
I kept my old ICD too, Elsa. I to sort of jump off of what you've been saying, I think I want to make a point about timing because there is a difference between having an acute cardiac event, like Kiki had or like Danielle had, and all of a sudden you're sort of thrust into this world where almost, retroactively you have to say, this has already happened to me, and now I have to figure out how to manage it and what does it mean for my life versus, I had this sort of protracted, emotional grappling with what was coming ahead in my treatment journey. And, one's not better or worse than the other, but they do feel a little bit different. But, the emotions are the same. I think, I had let the anxiety piece of things build so much up to the point where I finally had my surgery, but I also had enough time that I was finally able to wrap my head around it. I understood I had asked all the questions, right? I gathered all the information. I knew all the ins and outs of the procedure I was going to have, how long my hospital stay was supposed to be. I had all of the things in my head, right? And yet, things don't go perfectly, right? We can still have unexpected moments in our journeys. I didn't consider the fact that I might need an implanted device after the surgery. And when I did, I was really caught off guard by it, right? So then after the surgery, it really became for me about, okay, I survived this surgery, but now I've got this device. And at first, I sort of saw it as the enemy, right? Oh, this foreign object is in my body and I'm dependent on it now. And it took a lot of time. And, I had started going to see a mental health therapist not long after my initial diagnosis, but after the surgery, I really had a lot of, diagnosed medical PTSD. And so I went and I sought out a specialist outside of my regular therapist for that because, again, I was caught off guard by needing this ICD. And, I spent probably 8 to 10 months working with this specialist who really helped me to that and cardiac rehab, but those things got me back on the right path, accepting sort of how the surgery had gone, what life with this new device was going to be like, but it's challenging. And so I sort of had both experiences in terms of going back to this idea of the timing piece, right? Where you have something acute happen and you need to wrap your head around it versus something that you have a long time to prepare for.
Yeah. So I'll jump in and say, Deborah, like, I understand exactly what you're saying because there's anticipation anxiety. And then for like Kiki and me, there's the post, the PTSD of it all. Um, that was definitely my experience. So I had my heart attack on a Sunday evening, um, which directly related to my mental state of preparing for a hectic work week. And I actually found out in therapy that this is a real thing that happens to a lot of women Sunday evening because you're planning out your week, you're looking at what you have to do, what you have to get done, preparing yourself, and the stress and anxiety of it all creates the perfect storm, right? So I did not want to go back to work. I had true PTSD. Like I did not want to, um, and it wasn't that I was ill or that I could no longer do my job. I just did not want to return to the schedule of everything. And I took the longest time to return to a full work schedule. I mean, I pulled it out as long as I possibly could. I started with 1 day a week I would work, and then I think I even did a day and a half at some point. Like I wouldn't commit to 2 days. And so I kept balancing my workload with my rehab and my therapy and other things that I was trying to do to prepare myself mentally for being a full-time employee again. And it was, I think it was almost a year, and everybody was like, "You haven't went back to work yet?" And I was like, kind of, like a little bit, not fully. I just could not. It took, I want to say 10 to 11 months before I truly would, like, the anxiety of it all that I felt prepared and I could actually go back to work. And honestly, when I went back to work, I already had a plan that I was going to pivot my career at that point because I just was so, the fear of it all and the PTSD, everything that I did leading up to my heart attack, I was afraid to do for a very long time. There's still, Elsa, I'll tell you, there's still one yoga instructor that every time I see his name on the schedule, I skip the class. And we're talking about, what is this, 3.5 years now. But I had did a class with him on Saturday morning, and I remember I said fluids were coming from every part of my body. I was sweating, my nose was running, water was coming out of my eyes. And I was like, oh, this is like the hardest class ever. Now, I'm sure it had, I'm not blaming the yoga instructor, but I still participate with the same studio. He's still an instructor there, and every time I see his name on the schedule, I skip it. Now, I will do a class with him, like where he is in the class and we're friendly and I can talk to him, but I will not. And I mean, this is years later, but the the trauma of it all is real. Like it really, a lot of things stick out. I had went on a long hike on Sunday. I had watched football with my brother, and it never fails that when I'm in those spaces again, like if I'm watching football with my brother, my mind goes back to that day. If I walk that same trail, which isn't in my town, so I don't walk it often, my mind goes back to it. So it really is. There's a lot of um, mental behaviors that you really have to confront and deal with in order to feel like you're recovering or you're doing well.
If I could add some real quick, during my heart failing, because this is after like I'm getting shocked, I'm in the hospital in and out. I was so weak. I could, 6 steps would tire me out. And I would just get up and I knew I needed to leave my room. So I'd go like nap on the couch because I had insomnia. So I'd sleep all, be awake all night. And it isn't until recently that I can sit on that couch again because in my head it was like that was my sick couch. Like that's where I would sit when I didn't have the energy to live, and that was instead of it being a safe space that I, used to kind of comfort me, it became the no, I was in a bad place. So I would avoid it. And I thought in my head, like, why am I avoiding it? It's a nice couch. And it wasn't until recently, it's like, I'm gonna sit here and watch like one episode and see if I can get through that show. And then it was like, I'm gonna sit here with the grandkids because that'll be happy memories. Now I can do it and I'm okay. But it took me almost a year to be able to sit there, which is weird. Like, how do you avoid this obvious piece of furniture in your house? Sit uncomfortable on a chair instead of, the comfy space. So I get you, Danielle.
I can say I get you all too, but mine have been decades since I've experienced it. So it's very raw and real for you guys in a different way than it was for me, is for me currently. However, everything that you're feeling with the PTSD and all is something that I call cellular memory. Like everything that happened to you is resonating in every cell in your body, and you go into this fight or flight mode that we have to work on to shift and change, right? For me, in the past, for my first event was, I liken it to going through the grief cycle, the death of my old self. I was really, and then I went through the anger stage because I was really angry because I wasn't a diabetic, I wasn't obese, my cholesterol and everything was normal. I worked out, not as much as I should have, but I still ended up having heart disease when my father drank, he smoked, he ate bacon, he did all these things, and nobody in my family had heart disease at my age. And so I was really angry for the longest time. And I think for me, dealing with the emotions of that anger became critical for me in healing at that moment. I didn't have the trauma of going into the cath lab again and having that fear, but anytime you have to go in for a procedure or you think it's this is the end of your life. It's like a roller coaster, up and down with those emotions. But for me, it was like the death of the old self and awakening to a new person. And how was I going to get there without blaming myself if I failed?
Thank you so much for bringing that up, Claire. I think because I was hearing still a lot of the fear, the anxiety, the trauma, and anger is such a common response as well. It feels worth it before we move on to talk about coping to also say really explicitly like depression and grief are super common. Also, like even anger at the world for getting heart disease, like you described, Claire, like the universe kind of when you had good health behaviors. A lot of people can have almost like the other side of the coin of having guilt or shame about one's past behaviors and feeling responsible for one's heart disease. And that can be really complicated and really, really difficult to work through. I think, again, beyond anxiety and fear, one of the main things I heard you mention, a few of you mentioned in the initial comments you gave were about feeling isolated or even about like not telling your children, Claire, like this kind of feeling the burden by yourself. I'm hoping that each of you could maybe talk about when you felt isolated, misunderstood, or unsupported, particularly emotionally. What was most helpful for you during those moments? How did you cope with that emotional experience? Because it's such a tricky one.
I can go first. For me, the most helpful thing when I'm feeling isolated is to talk to other people who have gone through something similar. And so support groups were the first thing. I had attended Women Heart support group meetings in the past. I also, in 2020, started moderating an online support group for another organization. And I think I went into it thinking I'm a few years out from my surgery, I'm doing a little bit better. I can sort of present myself as I'm this resource that I was, looking for when I was first diagnosed that at the time I didn't have access to because it wasn't the resources weren't there as much as they are now. But I think what I wasn't expecting was that I would end up getting so much benefit out of being part of these groups. And even just as the moderator, as much as I hope I've helped the people in attendance, and I know that I have, I get so much out of it myself as well. And that's one of the things that has made a really big difference to me because I went from not knowing anybody else with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy to now I've talked to hundreds of people with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and as far away as Australia, and that has helped me to feel a lot less alone in this.
Just wanted to
Yeah,
jump in and say, me too, Deborah. I wasn't able to go to a group for 4 years because it just wasn't available. Then it didn't work out. Then I thought it was fine. Then the first group I went to, which I'm pretty sure was Women Heart, I cried and I was like, what? Yeah, the having that emotional validation and hearing your story and someone else's story is so powerful.
And I find that when people come to those groups, that's exactly what they're looking for. They just want to hear that somebody else is going through the same thing that they are. So regardless if one person is there to talk about, their medication options and someone else is there because they want to talk about the possibility of having a surgery, it sort of doesn't matter what it is or where they are in their treatment journey. They all just want to know that other people are experiencing the same thing, and that's what matters.
yeah, exactly. I feel the same way about pouring into others and walking away feeling more full than what I've been able to provide others. I know for me, I was surrounded by men at the time I was married. I had a teenage son, and I had my aging father that was my household at the time. And so I always say, all the boys were looking at me like I was broken. Um, they were concerned and they were supportive, but they just didn't know what to do with me. And it was nothing was getting done around the house, but they still didn't want me. They didn't want me to do anything, right? No, 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 you don't do it, but it's not getting done. And so Yeah, I was like me and my guys, and it was very hard to that was part of my sadness is that I could no longer um orchestrate my life, right? Because I was the person that made the appointments, told everybody where to be at what time, and check in with me, look at locations, all of that stuff to make sure that everything was going. And they were looking at me like I was broken, so that there were things that they weren't telling me, appointments that were getting missed or canceled, but oh, it's no big deal, it's no big deal. And um, I just thought my life is going to fall apart. And just to echo everyone else, for me, Women Heart was extra special because I was surrounded by men at the moment. And I have two sisters, but neither of them had been through anything like this. And so when I walked into my first Women Heart in person meeting, and there were 15 other ladies. Of all ages, because I was 44. There was someone that was my exact age, all the way up to a couple ladies that were in their 90s. And the lived experience, the shared experience, and the sisterhood just automatically almost just it was like a light bulb that life continues and you can do all the things. It was that was the brightest moment in my recovery. I had a great rehab staff. I did. I had a wonderful rehab staff, but actually stepping foot in that Women Heart meeting was the light bulb moment for me.
Yeah, the first group I found because Um, I was a teacher, so it's always like research and look things up and find the answer, right? And I needed to find the answer. I found a cardiomyopathy group in the UK. So I would attend their support group meetings at like because I'm in California. So it was my 4 a.m. I would get up. One day I just showed up in pajamas because I'd always try to dress. And I was always like the girl from California. But just listening to their stories kind of helped. That was before I found Women Heart, and then just by chance I came across, some information on Women Heart and I kept tracking it down. I was trying all the different Women Hearts until finally I got a response, and then like I said, I almost ran to that meeting. And it's just been great. And then I ended up finding another Women Heart group. So I was at one point attending, two of them. And then when an evening Women Heart group opened up because ours met in the afternoon, so it was hard to get to. Then that was pretty much the one that just kind of carried me and literally still carries me to today, in terms of just the friendships that were made, the support that's been there for me. I'd be in the ER saying, girls, I don't think I'm coming home today. It would be like, just those feelings when you're sitting in the ER and all these like prayers and just supportive comments would come through. And it was just so great to be held like in such a space, with again, everybody had a different type of heart disease, but we all knew what that was like, to sit with that, unknown, and that was just probably, the most comforting thing is to know that you're not alone, because you could have, your husband, your best friend, your sister, the person you always talk to or go to, and if they don't have it, they don't get it. They can't like just relate at that level. They get other things, and I think they do a great job of, I don't want to say distracting us, but reminding us of how wonderful life can be, and they take us out and they distract us with, let's go to the movies, let's go to the beach, and those were all really helpful as well. But I think being in the support groups was what really, I don't want to say saved me, but saved my sanity because without it, I don't really know like where I would be, you know. I'm sure I'd be fine, but just a different fine.
I would say for me, I started working with my cardiologist a few years after, well, about 5 years after I had my stent put in. And she's the one that said, we're seeing a lot of young women with heart disease. What are you going to do about it? But that wasn't really addressing my needs, for me to need support as well. But I jumped right in and I started a focus group and a support group. And then I found Women Heart. And I went to the training at the Mayo. And I have to share because I think hindsight is always great, and how we're dealing and coping at the time. But we all know that at the training, we first hear Dr. Sharon Hayes asking everybody to tell their story quickly. And I was one of the last ones to tell my story. And the whole time I sat there feeling I wasn't worthy enough to be there. And I think part of it was I didn't have surgery. I didn't have an implantable device. I didn't have a heart attack. I didn't have congestive heart failure. I just had a blocked artery. So it took me a while to get through feeling that I wasn't worthy of being there. But the sisterhood there were so supportive and caring, and I have lifelong friends from there. We call ourselves the oldies because we were the first few classes that started. And then fast forward to when I had my carotid artery surgery, to be 59 and to be told my carotid went from 50% occluded to almost 100% in 2 years. I was already on an anti-platelet, a blood thinner. I was on Crestor. I was on things for my blood pressure. I was doing stress management things, but I was in a stressful job. And so at that point, I realized I really wasn't managing my stress, and I was back in that cycle of dealing with it again. And my doctor said to me, I don't want you ever to think that you're not worthy, and you need to learn to speak your truth. And so I took 3 months off from work at that time. After my stent, I had 1 week. They're just like, you can go back to work, you're fine. But this time was a different journey. And that was the time, was 12 years, 14 years after my stent, that I think I finally got it. So it took me decades to realize that I had to build myself up in a different way and to manage my emotions in a different way.
Claire, again, I'm so glad you brought that up because I was hoping someone might explicitly point out the way that a number of us have also importantly pointed out that some of the emotional experiences in heart disease and post-cardiac event are actually positive emotions too, right? Like we find connection through Women Heart and connecting with others. We can find new pride or like connection to our purpose in life. I've heard that a lot from Women Heart folks, a sense of worthiness, right? Like there can be so much transformation and growth, but a key part of it is getting that support that helps you get through the hard parts. That's what I'm hearing too, and it's certainly what I have personally experienced. I'm seeing the time. And so what I would like to do is there's some wonderful questions in here from folks already and that are related to coping. So I'd love to bring them up and have people, we might not be able to have everyone answer the questions, but if you have, if you want to speak to it, please do. So that then we can maybe close the session with hearing from each of you, like that one thing that you hope people take away from this. So the questions first, I do see one, since we've talked a lot about anxiety and fear. Someone asked about the ways in which maybe explicitly, do any of you, I think I know the answer, but do any of you still struggle with anxiety and fear now? And then if so, like, how do you cope with that? Like going to each new appointment, like that anxiety that is very naturally coming up, like what do you do to get through that?
I keep like a medical journal. So I have a book that has all my information on it. I make my list of questions before I go into an appointment. I don't leave until the doctor answers it. And now I'm starting to advocate a lot more for myself. I've always done it. If I don't feel like I'm connecting with my healthcare professional, I find a new one. I have the talk with them like, these are my concerns, these are my fears, and if you can't help me, then I need someone else that can. And then I kind of make that switch. And I still feel guilty, but not very much because I'm like, I have to worry about me, and I think I've gotten better at the boundary settings and things like that in terms of what do I need and what do I really want. And then I try to articulate that as best I can.
I say education and support. So that goes along with what Elsa said. So take that list, that journal that you're keeping those questions, bring it to your support group meeting. And when you have the open space, just ask some of your sisters, like, when this happened to you. So you're getting the education of their real life experiences along with whatever research you have. And then you feel supported because you'll learn sometimes common obstacles that you're already prepared for. So getting, I always say education and support, as much credible information as you can possibly get to prepare yourself. And then the support even of speaking about it with other people that have the shared experience so that you have kind of an idea of how your medical provider might answer you or the possibilities of what they might tell you. It kind of gives, it makes you feel like you're ahead of the game.
I'll chime in as a psychologist here. In my own experience with emotional recovery, I was so grateful to have some of the really concrete coping skills that I learned myself in grad school and taught to my clients. And so, just to answer this question, when I have anxiety now, going to the cardiologist appointment, getting the echo, or going through new health problems that remind me of it, I turn to a lot of those skills, like most basically, like deep breathing, diaphragmatic breathing exercises to really work with my parasympathetic nervous system and like de-stress in that moment, grounding exercises, affirmation, like all of these things are really available. What I will say is I'm hoping to work with Women Heart to make some of this more available to champions. So check back then. But that's something that works for me too, in that like really concrete, I'm in the waiting room at the office, what do I do type of anxiety.
I think, Danielle, you mentioned it earlier. My mantra became, baby girl, you can do the hard things. And as I'm in, ready to get, stabbed with a needle, it's like, I can do the hard things. I can do the hard things, and it just kind of soothes me to get through that. And then it's the next thing.
And I'll just add one other coping tool that's been helpful to me, which is writing. And there's a whole modality of writing to heal. There are books about this. I have a friend who actually teaches coursework on this at a writing center in Boston. And so I've started writing about my experience, and that's been one way for me to process my emotions, but also by sharing the things that I've written, it can help other people as well. So there are a lot of different benefits to writing as a tool for coping.
Those are all the things that I do as well. So that's great to hear that everybody's doing them. My mantra right after became I am peace, peace within, peace is all around me. So I just would say that in addition to doing the breathing and different grounding breath work that I do and exploring other things like yoga and Tai Chi. But in the moment, breathing was the thing for me and visualizing that I was at peace.
I love that. Does anyone in this group I saw some nods when I brought it up. Have you struggled with the grief or depression or sadness side of things? There's a question, and I'd love at least someone to talk to this question of like, how do you hold that sadness or that grief with respect and grace, without like pushing to without staying there and staying in the sadness and maybe so it's holding respect or grace for the sadness and change because we certainly need to feel that, but then not staying in the sadness is what this person asked for advice around. Any thoughts?
I have a lot of grief regarding my donor because I know I'm only alive because she's not. And that's been the hardest thing to come to terms with. Prior to transplant, it was just knowing that that was going to be the eventual, process. Um, but I had to, and my sister-in-law helped me with, but they want to do this. They want to give you this gift, so you have to accept that and, and treasure it, and I think that's what I do. So I don't sit in it, for long because I think God, the world's a wonderful place. Life is really cool. So get out there and live it, and I think that's the best way we can do it with our diagnosis, with, this not knowing what the next thing is going to be in our health, is doing what we can to help, lessen, the damage that is going on in our hearts or just the evolution of that disease. But and also reminding ourselves that, we're here. And while we're here, do what we can, show that kindness, get out there and enjoy it. And that's the best thing we can do. Um, Eat right, sleep right, do all those things that are just normal, but kind of now do it more with intent and being more mindful about where you're at and that, presentness of it all. Grace.
Look, just kind of in a funny way, stress isn't good for your heart. So when you're grieving and you're sad and you're upset, remind yourself that you need to get to a better place, even to physically help your heart, right? So even if it's, the dancing until you feel joy, or like faking a laugh until it feels real, like force yourself to do something good for your heart by letting that stress go a little bit. That's like a trick I do to myself sometimes.
I like to always say at the end of the day, write something you're really grateful for the day. So when you go to sleep at night, that becomes part of you. But I forgot where I was going to go with that. Oh, part of it is the writing. I do a lot of writing. I've learned to meditate, and I meditate every day. And I try to look at things as my soul's lessons and moving forward in life. And Elsa, you were blessed with a heart, and yes, she gifted it to you. And maybe that was because you had to go on and do greater things. And look at all the wonderful things that you are doing now and for helping others. So you're setting a path for yourself and for others. So thank you. Thanks to each of you for what you're doing.
Thank you, Claire. And thank you, all of you. We have more questions, but we need to make sure we wrap up. I love staying on time. So, the thing I will say to kind of answer some questions and wrap up is again, there's no like normal recovery. And if you feel stuck in any of these painful emotions, that is where finding a therapist, a cardiopsychologist, getting more help, even a religious leader in your religion, like someone who's used to listening outside of Women Heart, would also be able to help with that. So thank you, all of you, for being a part of this conversation. This was amazing. I also think some of the questions and this conversation, which we didn't get to all the questions, proves like we need to keep talking about this, which I know Women Heart intends to do. So what we want to take away is that one of the most important things to acknowledge is that emotional impact of heart disease is real. Experiences like grief, fear, uncertainty, isolation, all of these things you've mentioned are real. And there's no perfect way to navigate these experiences. So I hope today created some space for honesty and shared learning, and that everyone takes away something meaningful from the stories that were shared today. So really, thank you so much for sharing, panelists, and thank you everyone for being here to listen.
Wow, I think we could keep going for hours. And I'm going to talk to some people to see if we might be able to do this again because there's so many I'll talk to my boss. I'll talk to my boss and see what we can do. There are so many great questions that still haven't been answered, right? And I know you said that, Kiki, but in particular, I'll just highlight guilt as a really interesting phenomenon. I'll just add one thing. When I think about, the stress that I go through in dealing with my heart disease, I ask myself, what would I tell a heart sister? And that reframe all of like flips it for me, and I can like really be kind to myself in a way that I maybe was too hard on myself the minute before. If I can say to myself, well, what would I tell somebody who's coming to me with these exact issues? It really changed, my heart softens and it really changes the way I approach myself. So anyway, I was thinking about that as all of you were answering. Please join me in thanking Kiki, Deborah, Claire, Danielle, and Elsa. It's been a phenomenal hour. It feels like it's just been a couple of minutes together. It's been so raw in some places, super honest, super thoughtful, and I just really am grateful to all of you for sharing. I want to also thank the audience because some of you have shared things you've never shared before in the chat and in the questions. And that's the name of the game for Women Heart, right? This is the place where we get cracked open to make sure that we keep not just our hearts healthy, but our minds and our souls and our spirits healthy. At Women Heart, we really believe that conversations like this matter because living with heart disease affects so many systems, not just the physical one. Creating space for women such as yourselves to share these experiences, to feel heard, to be seen, and to connect with others, really to help you navigate these similar journeys is so important and such an important part of what we do and what we program for all of you throughout the year. There was a question about a recording. Yes, this has been recorded and the recording will be made available in the coming days. So please look out for it on our website and then on our YouTube channel. And please, we encourage you to visit womenheart.org where you'll find even more resources beyond the things that we talked about today, as well as upcoming heart talks. And I can guarantee we're going to have another heart talk on mental health and heart disease again soon. Thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you again in the future. And I want to say a special welcome to the most recently graduated 2026 virtual class of Women Heart Champions. Thanks, everyone.